Hi everyone. So at the end of this video, we're going to be basically doing this to-do app using core data. So when you check on things um, and you end the app, you go back in, click on it, you should have your data all there, still remaining and everything like that. You can uncheck things, you can add an item, we'll call it, I'm trying to think of another grocery list item. Um, gosh. Chicken, right? It adds in chicken, although it adds in a very interesting spot. So, again, by the end of this video, we'll have this kind of fully working. We'll tackle some of these interesting issues in future videos and tutorials. All right, so let's get right into it. So if you've gotten this far along, we've done this custom data model, and we've done the NS encoder. And so now we're going to do the big part, which is core data. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create a new file with the core data. So typically we've done new file, it's been SwiftUI view. Today we're going to do data model. And I like doing data model because it allows me to, or building core data by hand, because it allows me to give me a little more control. If you do create a new project and you do the part where you include core data, it does add a lot of extra code that's not really necessary. So let's go ahead and just create this data model as they did in the Todoey app in the app brewery class. So we create that, and we'll just go ahead and add something that mimics our model here, our structure of item. All right. So go over here. We'll add a new entity. We will call it item, and in the attributes we'll have a title, and it will be of a type string, and then we'll add another one called done, and this will be a boolean. So this is the done flag, the other one's the title flag. If you watched the app brewery class, typically you want to change a module to current product module, and then code gen, you kind of want to leave it at class definition. This allows Xcode to create the class files behind the scenes, so you don't have to explicitly define what it looks like over here. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to make these non-optional, right? We need a title, and I want the attribute to have something. Now, back in this view, we don't need this structure anymore, right? We've now redefined it using our data model. So let's go ahead and delete this portion. And in fact, we're going to get rid of some of this stuff that I've had before. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of this commented out stuff. All right, this is not going to work because there's nothing, I can't find the type item, because even though we've defined our data model, we still haven't loaded it nor told Swift how to get the data or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this as well. So I'm going to just clean a lot of this up. We don't need a data file path anymore. This was for when we were trying to do the NS encoder. And then let's go down here, and we can remove all of this encoding piece. We don't need to encode it anymore, so I'm going to delete that. And again, part of the reason we use source control is so that if I mess up, I can undo it all. And load items, we might need it. I'm going to leave it here, and maybe we'll move it later. Do we need this? I'm not sure we'll need this because of the way the list view works in SwiftUI. So I'm going to just, do we need this right now, as a question mark. So right now all the errors you can kind of see is unable to find variables, which is totally fine. That's expected. All right, so previously we just described our data in a struct. Now we need to tell core data what all our data type looks like, what it contains, how it relates to each other in the data model, which we did. And then we want to create a new file called data controller. And so I like to create a new file called data controller, which then manages that data model. So we'll do a new file, and this is a Swift file, and we'll call it data controller. And in here, of course, we're going to import core data. And in addition, we are going to define the class. So let's do class data controller is an observable object, because we want to be able to use it with our state object property wrapper later on, so that when our app launches, we are then able to keep it alive as long as the app is running, so we're able to communicate with our data model. So we're going to make an observable object because we want to use it with our state object. And in here, we're going to use our NS persistent container, NS standing for Next Step, which was a company I think Steve Jobs brought over. So the core data has a lot of roots there. So let container equal NS persistent container, and we're going to call it what we called it up here, which was data model, right? Data model, and we want to make sure we spell that correctly. All right. I'm going to hit Control Build, see what happens. It's going to fail. Can't find the item array, but that's all right. Just want to make sure that every once in a while I like to just build in in Xcode, just to make sure that all the new classes and all the new definitions and all that stuff is just being recognized by Xcode. All right, so this tells core data that we want to use this data model that we just created, the data model. But in order to actually use the data model or to load the data, we need to load the persistent stores on our container. All right, so it's very similar to what you saw in the app array course. So init container dot load persistent stores, and what we're going to do here is we're going to do a description and error in if let error equals error. And this is very similar to what they were doing in the class. We're going to print core data failed to load, and we'll just error. Okay, we'll print out the error. Again, in core data, it's tough to do anything if you have a core data fail to load. I guess you could, in theory, wipe all the data and start all over, but that's not a great experience for the user anyway. So hopefully we never corrupt our core data. So this really completes our data controller, and our final step is really to create a instance of this, and that way we can create instance of this so that we can load our core data. All right, so we need to tell our app about this. So back up here in the Todoey SwiftUI app, what we're going to do is we are going to give it a state object, and we are going to call it a private. And the reason we had to make it an observable object is our data controller an observable object is for this. We call it data controller. All right. And then in our to-do list view, we're going to actually bring this environment up. So we're going to have an environment, and the key path here is the managed object context, and the value is actually our data controller that we just defined above top. Data controller, the container, and the view context. All right. So at this point, this is a data model that we're just kind of storing, and with the view context, the idea is it's to work with all of our data in memory. And the course does a really good job of describing this, where the view context is really, quote unquote, the staging area, and then you write it into the data model. So, and I think some of you know that the data model is really like a SQLite database. So now the last thing we need to do, or maybe part of the things we need to do, is to do that fetch request. All right, so we need to get our data out. So what we can do here is, I'm actually going to delete this directory as well. We don't, you know what, let's keep it. I'm never sure if we're going to need that again to kind of find, if we want to take a look at the SQLite file or something like that. But so in our view, we are going to do a fetch request. So at fetch request sort descriptors. This is just to sort something. Var, and I'm going to call it item array just to keep it consistent throughout the whole project, but it's not really an item array, and so I hesitate to do that, but it's okay. Fetched results for item. So this should go ahead and bring in all of the items from our data store, our data model, and load it into this item array. So let's start fixing some of these issues that we have down here. So cannot convert value of binding into some item. All right, so because I started using these binding $signs, we can actually simplify this. So we're just going to do for each item array, and we're going to call it item, right? And here is the, I don't know what to describe it, the silly part, the interesting part about data models. So as you recall in the data model, we define these as non-optional. However, even if we define it as non-optional, I guess it's possible that someone could do a manual insert or something into that database. So this is going to say that we have to force unwrap it, right? So even though it's non-optional, it's possible, I guess, that it is it can be unwrapped, right? So, or it could be nil. So if we have to force unwrap it. So for labels, I prefer to do something like unknown item. Here, I don't mind just force unwrapping that. That's just a print, and that allows us to print our button item. This toggles. There's no change in that at all because again we've defined the item .done to also be a boolean, so we can toggle that. And then down here we have let's see what else we need to change. So okay, so add item, right? So add item needs to be modified a little bit. We're not appending to an item array or anything like that. And so what we will do is we're going to do a let new item. So we're going to still create a new item, but instead of just doing an item with a random curly brace, we're going to say, hey, we want that NS managed object context, which we called context up above. Then in here, we want to take the title, same thing, nothing changes here. Also done, when we default, it's going to be false. And then finally, no, did I not define context in scope yet? So if I did not define context, it's because I did not do an environment variable. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to define our manage object context, we need an environment variable. So environment, another property wrapper that reads from a view's environment, and we're going to do that managed, I don't know why I keep doing that, managed object context, and we're going to call it context. All right, and I think this is very similar to what they did in the Todoey app. All right, so now we have that working. We have our context, and we're going to do, this is all right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try to save our context. Save, right? That's it. And I think this should be done. And I think just for sake of cleanliness, load items, I don't think we need. I'm going to remove this for now and just clean up our code. Take away this task. We don't need that either. And I think we can give this a test. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Okay, so it should be loading from our data store. So let's go ahead and just do a grocery list for this one. And we'll add banana. Yes. So I'm going to grocery store, apples. All right. Candy. I love my candy. Salt. All right. And we'll go ahead and just click on these. All right. So pretty neat, all right? So right now, at this point, you really have a full-fledged working to-do list app. Let me just close this out. And we'll load it back up again. Let's see if we can have all of our things in here. Apples and candy are selected. Let's close this off. Go back in here, load it up. We expect, oh, so something's wrong here. Something's not being stored. So let's go back and see what we did wrong. So if we go back here, when we toggle the button, but we actually don't save it. No, we should probably need to, I'm sorry, not this, this part here. We toggle the item, but we never actually save it. So we probably should, after toggling item, we also probably want to context.save. All right, so we have to save this item. And let's try it again. Argument passed that takes no arguments. Oh, excuse me. Context.save. So, all right, so we'll just do the same thing here, where we will do a try context save. I'll just copy the same thing here. All right, now let's try this again. All right, so let's try apples and candy. All right, close it off, and then we load it back up. Yep, there it is, so it saves. Now one thing you might notice is that sometimes when I add a new item, let's call it cereal, that it just inserts in a really random order. And part of the reason for this is just the way we bring this information back without a sort here. And so what we'll do in the next couple of videos is we're going to tackle doing search bar and things like that, and we'll kind of correct this issue. But as it stands right now, I mean, we are using core data. You're able to kind of update these items. You can add new items. The oranges. And you can check them off when you have them done. So it's really a mostly working to-do app. But we're going to go ahead and end this video here because I don't want to make it too long. And later on, we will go ahead and clean up a lot of these kind of nuanced issues with our application. All right, thanks everyone.